finish our discussion on the front end in web development. Of course, we have our three cornerstones: HTML5 for context, for structure of your documents, right? CSS for styling, and JavaScript for the interactivity, for dynamism, right? So, backend, of course, again, so we'll talk about backend in a moment, of course, is where we have the server-side logic, right? Where we have to actually have some sort of storage, right? Again, because our front end or browsers, well, there's relatively limited in what they can store. I mean, there are increasingly more capabilities for the browsers, but still, the server has a basically a very, very important place to play. Okay, so now let's go to JavaScript. I also had some examples of early HTML4. For example, this is how HTML4 looked. You had to write all kinds of extra stuff. Like you had to write all this, this boilerplate, right? Type public 4.0 transitional. You had to do this for like about 10 years, right? So kind of annoying, really. So if you see this in here, some web pages, it's a really old web page, like from like 10 years old at least. Now, of course, you have much simpler. You have HTML, much simpler. Now, so JavaScript standards. So again, I already spoke how it was a very rough language, and it was basically users. Meaning, the idea was that maybe if you have a web page, you want to do some little JavaScript to maybe have some animations, do some actually things that CSS handles. A lot of things like form validation, things like that, would be handled by JavaScript. Increasingly, of course, these days, HTML and CSS can do many of these tasks. So, but at the same time, JavaScript responsibilities have grown tremendously, right? It used to be also that you could have a web page and you could disable JavaScript on a web page and it would work, most likely, right? But nowadays it's almost impossible to run a browser without JavaScript. I mean, if you disable it, most pages will not work. This means there's something happening behind the scenes, right? If you open developer view, right? I mean, if you open up something like, let me open up something like Delphi, right? If you open Delphi, right? And even if it's my ad block, right? I have to adjust, but basically if I go to developer view, right? Right, and I go to network view, it's scary what's happening here, right? You disable cache, right? And I do Control R allowed, right? So there is basically JavaScript everywhere, right? Type, right? We do scripts, right? Look at this here, right? And these are minimized scripts. So this Delphi page, right, has, I don't know, way too much, right? Way too much stuff happening. And of course, most of it is ad related, of course, ad tracking, things like that, right? You don't really need that much stuff happening for a regular news page, of course. What's happening underneath? Let's see if we have anything we can actually inspect, right? Look at this code, right? It's probably all minimized, right? I'm sure. Yeah, look at this, right? Look at this nice JavaScript code. It's probably just minimized code, right? Hard to say what it is, right? There's some cookies. You can see there's some stuff happening here. And really hard to determine what it does actually, right? There's also concatenations, right? So there's lots of processing happening underneath actually, right? So it'd be really hard to see exactly what's happening, but most of it is actually dealing with all kinds of frameworks, libraries, right? So what happened is people started to want to do more and more with JavaScript. A key moment was probably the release of Gmail in 2004, right? Some key moments in front end development. Release of Gmail. Yeah. So it showcased the power of Ajax, right? So this is basically asynchronous JavaScript. Idea being that you load the web page, right? But you don't have to load everything. So, release of jQuery. So, how many people have used jQuery? Anyone? Maybe?
Not really, but I've heard about it.
You heard it exists, right? It actually is extremely popular library still, even though it's kind of like very sort of, how should I say, very not much development is happening, right? It's sort of locked down, not locked down, but basically it's set, right? jQuery, right. jQuery, right? So because the early JavaScript, it didn't have as many good, nice functions for manipulation, right? It simplified development tremendously, right? At the same time, when you managing state, managing complex, yeah, yeah, all right. Angular was probably the next one, AngularJS. So this is released also by Google, yes. So this was early full framework. So what's a framework? Framework compared to library. Framework includes a lot of things, how do you do it things. So it has opinions, remember. What's the difference between framework and library? Library just gives you tools, you do whatever you want. Framework has strong opinions how things should be done, right? So if that's the main, because of course frameworks will have many library-like features, right? And similarly, you could have opinions on libraries, right? But they are usually libraries are less opinionated, right? So AngularJS, big for early hit, right? So what did they do wrong? Well, so it was introduced for what? Idea was to build a single page application. So what's a single page application? Well, how will you define single page application? Well, it's a single page, right? But so what is, okay. So how does it differ from a static site? Well, in a single page application, what's happening? You have,
You can still have databases and
yeah,
interaction.
you are doing a lot of interaction through it's so-called API calls, basically your page, right? This is basically a single page application what I'm using right now, right? Because the URL is not changing. I mean, you could also do a navigation with it, right? But there's a lot of things happening here, right? A lot of elements are being updated, right? A lot of change is happening. So, and of course, when we were using jQuery, you had to bind events when something happens, like a UI event, user clicking something, you do everything by hand. You could do a couple things, click on button, do something, right? That's easy. But you have 550 buttons, you want to do menus, things like this, right? Stuff like this, like tabs, implement this scrolling, nicely, all of this dynamism. Well, it got kind of difficult. So AngularJS, right, was the first like full sort of like a full front-end framework, right? So what happened afterwards? Of course, well, they made a big mistake, right? They released a version which is not compatible, an incompatible version. Yeah, Angular 2+. So this is, if maybe some of you use that work. You can. But so Angular. So there's two things. There's Angular or Angular 2+, or AngularJS is original. So, yeah. So the problem is, of course, that. Let me give a link to also. Yeah, let's see if this works. Angular. Yeah, nice. So release of React. So who released React? Who do you know? Facebook, exactly, right. So they said, okay, Google's doing this, so they had some alternative ideas. Right, let's see, React. So they actually don't call it a framework, right? But they introduced this idea of something called a virtual DOM. So idea was that you sort of you keep in your browser memory, right, your JavaScript, right? It keeps sort of like what the web page should look like, but it's not going to draw it. It's only going to draw it when changes happen. So very powerful idea, right? So it is, I would say, still most popular, even for job security, learning React, I definitely recommend, right? Angular also, surprising Angular also is still very popular, but React, right? So extremely large, right? So let's see if this is a good link. No, that's a big link, but okay. Right, React, Angular homepage. Yeah, Angular IO. Yep, that's it. Angular version 19 is already here, right? All right, and React, right. And the thing is, of course, React has gotten relatively complicated these days. They keep adding and keep remaking things, right? On the React homepage, right? So afterwards, what else appeared was, of course, Vue, right? So this is the third major library, right? And basically, Vue was created by ex-Googler. Well, I believe he was Evan Vue, if I remember correctly, right? That's his name, right? Of Asian Chinese, but so the main thing is that, of course, it was uh, open source. I mean, of course, they're all open source, but Angular, you sort of felt like there's this Google behind it, you know, and then there's a Facebook, and so Vue is sort of like a alternative, right? It's relatively simple, but again, right, not something. Of course, it can get complex, right? So, all right. Also, at the same time, yeah, there's also mention of Bootstrap, uh, CSS networks, CSS libraries, right? So, Bootstrap. Right. So we have our JavaScript libraries. So again, this means functionality used commonly for web development is already included. Similarly for CSS, right? Most of us are not designers, but we would like to have a web page which does not look completely horrible, right? So Bootstrap, who built Bootstrap, do you know? Well, that company doesn't have the name anymore, right? They have a new name. X now. It used to be Twitter. So it's built by Twitter, right? Yeah. So, basic idea of this, so you use all these CSS styling, all these ideas, they have all these expensive designers at Twitter. Hey, we're going to provide this sort of like our guidelines. So now, I would say, I don't know, 80, 90 pages on a web look like Bootstrap page, even if they're not using Bootstrap, because of course these guidelines, you know, were quite powerful, right? And it's familiarity, you know, has its place, again. So, and of course there's other ones. There are other ones, like there is something called, what you call it, tailwind CSS, right? So, there's Bulma, and there are many other, and so materialize, right, semantic UI, and so on. Okay, now, there's also some other CSS libraries, more other JavaScript libraries. Well, jQuery we already saw. There is something called Svelte, right? Svelte. Yeah. So this is a modern JavaScript framework. Idea is this, that you compile you write your code in JavaScript and you compile it into highly optimized JavaScript code, resulting in faster performance. D3, this is actually for visualizations, right? Now, how about right, TypeScript? Let's do TypeScript, right? Right. Again, we'll touch on TypeScript because JavaScript is so loose. It's even, you know, it has all these quirks. You want to be stricter, right? So it's a superset of JavaScript, meaning if you write JavaScript, right? You can call it TypeScript, and it'll be technically, you rename your file, it will work basically, right? But of course, the idea is you add these type annotations, right? You have static typing, which is good. Why? Why is static typing good? Why do you want? Yeah. Yeah, you catch more errors earlier, right? So the only bad thing what I don't like about TypeScript, of course, it's not really a language, right? It's just a step, meaning if this is built into browser, this would be fantastic, but it's not built into browser, right? So you basically don't see your final code. You have another step. You write TypeScript, it transpiles to JavaScript, right? So that's the kind of downside, right? So, yeah, okay. And this was TypeScript home page, right? All right. So now, let's go into this overview. I mentioned this here in our web page, I mean our home, that there is a front-end roadmap. I don't know if you've seen this. Is really kind of neat, right? So it's been updated for like, I don't know, I've seen this for like 6-7 years, right? So basically, you learn the basics. So this is what you have if you want to do front-end, right? So you want to make money and work on the front end, right? You need to know what the internet is, right? What's the domain name, HTTP, right? How DNS works, right? I know DNS, right? So you learn your HTML, right? You learn your CSS, right? You learn JavaScript. You know what JavaScript, you know version control system, right? It's kind of funny. Now the only choice is Git right now. It used to be you had a couple other choices, right? You basically use Git, right? So it's in a way it's good, right? Hosting, right? Somewhere. right? GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, right? So basic idea. One thing you should remember is that the language itself, JavaScript, is different from the JavaScript that you use on a browser because it includes the DOM API, the way of manipulating all of the visual elements, right? So that's not technically not part of JavaScript language. It's an API. It's an extra addition, right? Because JavaScript got so popular that now, of course, we have JavaScript also on a server side, which we'll talk in a few moments, right? So there's CSS. You can learn a lot of things about CSS. There used to be a lot of stuff you had to learn about CSS, but now, of course, would be pick a framework, right? So your package manager. So one thing, of course, what's really painful is, which I don't talk about, is package management in JavaScript world. They have this tendency to use very tiny libraries, meaning there's a library just do left pad, right? Just padding. It's famous case. Somebody said, okay, here's a function. We should do padding, right? You enter how many what kind of white space, what kind of padding you want on your string, and we'll return you. It's a single function. It's a trivial function. But the problem was it was used by so many people. When the original guy or developer, right, he was a student maybe, right, he just, okay, I'm done, I don't need it, he just deleted it or renamed it, and then it broke a lot of packages. So the JavaScript world is quite messy in a way, right? So what else do you need to learn, right? So there's processors, there's lots of things, right? Of course, you got to talk about web security, right? Authorization, right? Also, how we do something called hydration. So what's hydration? Concept of hydration. Or web application on a browser, right? Hydration is like putting water on your plants. So it's your application. It's like dry, it's like a sponge ready to get some water, right? And the water is going to be, the hydration is going to be your data, right? So the concept is where you need to get this somewhere, right? So of course it comes from some database, from a server, right? It doesn't have to be your server. It could be somebody else's server. You have authorization possibly, right? API, right? So you hydrate through that. So it's usually done through JSON. Of course, JSON is JavaScript object notation. But there's alternative, GraphQL. So there's a lot of concepts, right? So obviously a full stack web development course would be one semester, 2 semesters, right? But this is a good outline to see what you need to learn to do to feel comfortable, right? So some things are this yellow part, this authentication, right? Actually, is really hard to get right. Usually, of course, you use some libraries, right? So the thing, of course, is you need to pick. There are many places where you pick your one poison, basically, right? So now. Concept of hydration. Let's see what the AI says. I have a feeling we will not get to the back end, right? So because we have so much front end stuff to talk about, right? So right. Yeah, right. So idea, of course, is that one of the downsides of using so much JavaScript on your web page is, of course, that it gets slow, right? You have lots of stuff happening, right? So it's kind of interestingly that you get something called server-side rendering, meaning you generate the initial HTML on a server side, actually, right? So you improve the performance, right? And then, of course, again, you might do the interactivity afterwards on the client side. With JavaScript, you hydrate, right? So data formats for hydration. Data formats for hydration. Usually will be JSON, right? XML, not so easy. YAML, but of course also protocol buffers, and also like something like a GraphQL. GraphQL, right? So this is what was pushed for a while. GraphQL is also, but I think developed by Facebook, I believe, right? Have anyone used GraphQL? Not.
Are you connected to a vector database?
Yeah.
That you
GraphQL, right?
But I haven't specifically queried anything.
Yeah, so Its idea, of course, is to provide only, don't give you like, it doesn't give you all the data. Like if you do JSON, right, your queries, you'll usually get some data you don't need, right? The GraphQL is more like a more targeted way of getting data, but it's not, it's not as, I would say it's not for everything. It's for very few use cases, actually. JSON is probably the best one for this, actually, right? So, okay, now, so we have type of web page, right? So a couple other concepts, some other concepts for front end, some other concepts, other front end concept, because I don't finish this. So progressive, multi-page, of course, multi-page application, right? Well, which is basically multi-page, basically, right, MPR. Basically, so this is a classical way of doing it. Classical, right, so single page. Yeah, that's it, rendering. Right. Right. So client-side rendering, this means that we have some minimal HTML and the JavaScript on the client side. So you have to always ask yourself when you're doing web development, where is actually the building of the web page going to happen? Is it going to happen on a user, right? Which is increasing the norm, right? Meaning you say, okay, you have a pretty powerful computer, it's running a decent browser, right? It's not running on a potato, right? So you can build the web page yourself, basically, on the client, right? And this is not a new concept. This goes back to like 50s, 60s, way before web technologies, right? You have this, is the client thin or thick? Basically, how much work do you want the client to do? And increasingly the trend has been that you want to make the client do more work, right? But of course it's a pushback. Again, I'm more on the side actually on the classical server side, meaning I want the servers to do more work, right? Because sometimes, but the downside is if you are running a potato, right, this potato is going to look really slow, right? Especially find some of these, your grandma's computer which was bought on a sale like 10 years ago, right? It's not going to do very well on your modern web apps, basically, right? So that's an issue, actually, right? Yeah. Okay, so multi-page application, right? So multi-page applications, right? So this is a classical way, right? This multi-page applications, multi-page applications are used to be the dominant. Yeah, and I personally really like MPAs are easier to make, right? Yeah, because less work, and it's also there's been also some pushback. There's some companies. What's the name? There has been a resurgence in MPAs, right? Okay. So what else I want to talk about? What's some other concepts, right? Right. I guess we'll do the full stack on Thursday, actually, right? Because we have the back side, right? How is the actual server side going to be done, right? We'll need to talk about a lot of concepts there. The good or bad news is that you can use pretty much any language, right? So maybe actually what I'll do is here, I have a few more minutes. Let's talk about the WSM, right? WebAssembly. So WebAssembly offers a way to run code written in language like C, C++, Rust, or Kotlin, whatever, right? So it's kind of cool, but unfortunately, right, it's supported by all the major browsers, right? You can check here, but there is a downside, right? The limitation, one major limitation of WebAssembly is that it does not support all DOM. Let me see if AI says, yeah. And I want to check again. WebAssembly, all right. So it's a machine. It's basically a virtual machine, right? So it is for like if you want to write a I don't know, your live online interpreter, right, for Python, for example, right, on your browser. This is what you use. If you want to do like a online video editing machine, you use WebAssembly. You use a like Figma. Use it like if you want to do an online web application, which is using some sort of needs to do some processing, meaning some sort of like a actual intensive processing, right? Then WebAssembly is probably what you want, right? So, but unfortunately, there's the downside is that it's not really, you can't write, you can write like, I don't know, 80-90% of application in WebAssembly, but you still need regular all DOM manipulations. Yeah, yeah. So you need to handle, so that's kind of, I would say not stuck, but it means you're still stuck with JavaScript, right? So, right, so you could do very efficient applications. Some examples. So applications that use, right, yes, applications, web applications. This means you can, like you see in your Kotlin or like your pretty much Go, I think also has a compiler. You can compile, instead of compiling to your machine code, you can compile to WebAssembly, right? But like I said, you don't have a full, I don't know why they made this, but you don't have the full DOM handling, and that kind of stinks, right? So you're still stuck with JavaScript, right? So, very cool applications that use WebAssembly. I would say Figma, yes, very famous example, right? I'm sure you have used Figma, right? AutoCAD Web, I would not be surprised, right? I don't use AutoCAD Web, but yes. Unity WebGL also would be an example, right? Google Earth. Let's double check that. I think so too, right? I'm going to discuss. So Google Earth WebAssembly. Let's see if it's actually true. WebAssembly. No, it will make sense because you have to calculate, right? Yeah, we're starting to switch. This was like what 6 years ago. Yeah. So how is WebAssembly, right? So idea is that all kinds of manipulations, right? Of 3D data you can do with WebAssembly. Let's see OS emulation using WebAssembly. Things you can do, right? I think let me finish this today's lecture with Windows 2000 online, right? Yeah, where is my turbo emulator, right? Virtual machines, right? So JS Linux, right? Bellard, right? This is do you guys know who Bellard is? He is probably the best programmer in the world, right? Extremely famous, but very low key French guy. At one time, I think he's only, I mean, he built what? FFmpeg is his right? What's the other big projects he's built? He started a lot of famous projects, like, and of course, well, he does things like this, like you can run, this is like a while ago, you can run Windows 2000 on your browser, for example, right? So this is Windows 2000 starting in a browser, right? It's one of his experiments. He's done lots of video processing things. He held the world record for the most digits of pi, things like that. He wrote his own JavaScript compiler, his own C compiler, right? So let's see how fast it is. So this is one of those things, this is kind of fun to have, but basically sort of Inception type of joke, basically, right? You've seen the movie Inception, right? Yeah, so like you keep going in circles, right? So you have a dream is in a dream is in a dream, right? So we have a browser, right, which is running a OS. So I have a browser, right? So let's do that, right? So we can keep going theoretically, right? So let's wait it loads, right? So it's not very fast. So I can open a Firefox, right? And I can go to some website, right? So then of course I could open up another emulator, right? If I want to. Of course it's going to get very slow. It's already getting kind of slow, right? So, but again, why is it possible? Because dude, so basically it's written in JavaScript, right? He's very good at, he also wrote, I think, QEMU also, emulator software, right? So, let me see what else has he written. James Bellard. Let's see, Fabrice Bellard, right? Yeah, so FFmpeg, QEMU, Tiny C compiler. He has Bellard's his own formula, right? So, right, OpenGL, TinyGL, right? Yeah, like He also built his own, yeah, of course, he built his own ANN, of course, right? Beating, he wrote his own neural network library for this, right? Right, so all kinds of cool things, like his own auto compression utilities and things like that, which actually not only, I mean, we can do it too, but have a good performance. That's the thing, right? So, right, yeah. So, did he load the page? Or maybe I don't. Oh, it should work. We'll make it work. I'll check if it works. It should still work. This again, but he wrote this a long time ago, like about 8 or 9 years ago. He might have. I don't. I think this might not even have WebAssembly. It might be just pure JavaScript, right? So what he did, of course, how was this done? I mean, this is extreme version of web application, right? I mean, to have full-blown OS, of course, basically what he did is he made a virtual machine for the CPU, basically, right? So he emulates the CPU, then it's easy, right? That's the easy part. You make an emulator for the CPU, and then you can compile to that, basically, right? You can compile the whole Windows, basically, for that machine, right? But it's not load links, it's too, right? I can write an email, right? Oh no, it loaded, all right. Let's go to RBS. It should work. Let's see how it looks. It's going to look like horrible. It's going to look horrible because it's like a version. What version? It's like 1 point something from 2000s, right? But it should work. Let's take a look. Oh, come on. Yeah, I want to get some page. It should go to RBS. Let's take a look. Too slow. We won't have time to do it today. No, I don't save it. Of course, if it's too slow, I'm just going to close it. I'm going to close it, right? But yeah. You can also run Windows. You can, of course, run Linux in it online. Emulate an extreme. All right. So, main thing from today, no quiz by today. Maybe later, but not today. So main thing for today is, of course, remember, of course, our 3 pillars, right? HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Realize how they work together, right? And I don't know how much work have you done with JavaScript before. Not much, right? Some of you have, right? So JavaScript, of course, is that actually it looks like C, but it's more like Lisp. So it's kind of like actually underneath. It's like it's been said. It's Lisp in C closing, basically. Right, it looks like C, but actually the syntax, actually what the concepts are, the things we did in closure actually are applied to JavaScript. All right, so guys, I'll see you on Thursday.